I didn't, you know what? I ignored it for a while.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how long, but I ignored it enough that, I mean, it created real friction between me and her.
so interesting.
And then between her and then the team started to feel it.
Yeah.
And then she ended up leaving. And I remember one of the things that she said on the exit was like, this was the one thing.
Right.
So this is the only thing about internal comms. It's like the speed of response.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
if you put these conversations off, they can cost you. Welcome back, everybody. Behind the Grind with Rich Brubaker and
Brian Tam.
we are here for another episode behind the grind, also behind the quarantine, because as you know, there's the coronavirus going on in China. So for those of you that are in China, we hope that you're safely behind your face mask. Based on this, actually, and this coronavirus, I was actually thinking, and a bunch of other things and a bunch of talks we've been talking about.
Sure.
I was thinking about the importance of how do you talk to your teams about really important topics, but ones that we don't like to talk about. Like, you've always got that like conversation. You're like, oh, I should talk to Jack. I should talk to Jill about this.
Right.
And it's like, it's a constant thing that I was thinking about. Like, I bet let's say at least on a monthly basis, let's be nice about it, maybe on a weekly basis, depending on the timing. You kind of have that, like, I should have that conversation, and then bing, Twitter or Facebook or something like distracts you. And then later on, I would think about how many of those conversations that I postponed for a day, a week, a month, longer, came back to like cost me more.
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like,
difficult conversations.
Well, so let's talk about that. Like,
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's two levels of difficult, and one is yes, it's a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
Right? You have, say, someone didn't perform on a project, or
Yep.
you have a salary request, or you have to talk about, like, we're running out of money. Like, those are difficult conversations.
How'd you know?
Pay attention, people, if you're on his team. I guess he's like out here exposing himself. But then there's like just the difficult conversations that I think are a little bit more like, I don't have time right now. I'm too busy. Or, is this, in your head, you're mentally calculating if it's important enough or important against the things that you're doing right now, right? So difficult in a different way, but not necessarily the conversation's not difficult.
We're out there. We're trying to sell. We're trying to meet clients. We're trying to do all the marketing. We're in both our cases, we are the face and the marketing in many regards for our company. Yeah. There are other aspects, of course. Right. But I mean, being the founder and entrepreneur and the CEO, that's part of the role. Yeah. Right. So because we're so externally focused on that side, sometimes the team gets left behind. Yeah. And we've talked about this in multiple podcasts about how team is the thing that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, and we've kind of given a lot of our context about where we're struggling. This was another one that, and my wife's a specialist in internal comms, so I also think about that all the time. Lucky you.
Lucky me, actually, I gotta say. Shout out to Sid. So I guess the starting point, like, what are the conversations that you find that you typically you put off, like you just, and like what are some reasons behind that?
All right, I think money is always a difficult one, and that's probably the only one, and maybe performance. What I mean by performance is like really criticizing somebody, right? Okay. Because a lot of times the thing is, as you were talking about, I was like, oh, some of those things don't really relate to me because I do have like pretty much like I'm checking it all the time. Like every meeting I started with like, how do you guys feel? Every message I send afterwards is like, how was that meeting for you? Right. So I'm doing a lot of that. It's much easier with a 4-person team, 5-person team. Right. So I can do that. But thinking about what was difficult was money. So when they are when we're trying to like discuss money in terms of how much we get paid or how much we are going to charge the client or things like this, or all these kind of evaluating or putting a number to your own self-worth or the worth of other people, I think has always been tricky.
Actually, when you say how we get paid, do you guys, is this a democratic process, like project by project? Like,
it is.
Oh, all right. So how do you manage that? Like, all right, we made $100 on this project.
Sometimes. All
right, $10 on this project.
It's more realistic.
All right. What's the process that you guys go through to determine who makes what? Right. And then what have been some maybe the challenges that have come out of that?
So early on, we didn't have much of a system. It was like 2-3 guys, and we were just like, guys, split it 3 ways, right? But then we realized not everybody was contributing equally, because they had family, they had other priorities, blah blah blah, different passion levels, and then it got to a point where like it really, and I didn't communicate it, and it really just like pulled on my heartstrings. Yeah. And we had a real difficult conversation about how to split the money, and eventually we had to devise some sort of system to break it down, to break down the
what was pulling at your heartstrings? Like, you felt that someone was getting screwed, you felt you were getting screwed, like who?
Yeah, I mean, it was easy, and in the beginning, you know, we needed it to be easy, so we made it this the simple third. Yeah. But it was like, well, you know, some people, they didn't find the client, they didn't do the work, they didn't, you know, they just showed up, and all these different things, right? Their commitment levels are all different, so you know, it didn't, it felt unfair on multiple levels, right? Some people just didn't care, right? And then on the other hand, like, I was running out of money, and I was burning out, and all that kind of stuff, right? But so those kind of things made it uneasy to talk about very early on. So after a while, we needed to devise a system to break that money down.
Now, before that happened, you feel uneasy about this, it's pulling at your heartstrings, and you're like, look, guys, I don't like this. Was that the next step then? Was to communicate this to the team, and then how did they take it? Were they like, yeah, we all think this is a stupid process too? Or they're like, no, actually we like it because...
Before we from the simple split to the complicated split, right? So from the simple split to the middle point where we needed to have that conversation about how we're going to change it, was I brought up the topic, and the team was like, yeah, you know, it doesn't really make sense. Are you sure that we should do this simple split? Because they themselves knew, right? And I was lucky enough to work with very mature co-founders at that time. And so they were just like, yeah, actually, you know, you are working a lot harder than us. It doesn't really make sense. And then we started adding new people, and they were a bit more junior, and so there was a little more complication around that. So that's where we needed to get creative with how we shared the money, split the money. So that took a little bit.
So you had the conversation, everyone's like pretty on board. How long did it take? Did you postpone that conversation for a while because you didn't want to start it? And did it cost you or other people money because of that, right?
For sure. I mean, you know, in the beginning I thought like, no, we're partners, we need to be fair, and we need to split it equally, right? And it's like I would say, no, this is for the long term, right? And so we split it this way. And I think in some ways I was trying to get them to up their commitment by not changing the split, because their commitment, again, family, other priorities, other life situations, different whatever, they weren't all in, right? I was literally all in. I had nothing else going for me. So this had to be it. And I think it's really interesting that you asked that. It's like, I didn't push the conversation like, hey, why don't you work harder? Because that's a hard conversation to have. And so that was something that we needed to address, and eventually we did.
And that's made the organization better, like?
Yeah, much more. I think you know, it gives everybody a sense of understanding of how they would earn money, and it's not just like a random like split. Sure. So there's some logic behind it, but it's very complicated, and so that's why from the simple to the complicated, it's actually like very, very complicated.
I mean, so actually from our perspective, you know, things are actually a lot more clear, because you know, I'm the owner, and I have a team that are fully employed, and they have salaries, and we've actually set up, like, say, a commission structure. So for everyone, like, if you sell something, you get X%, and that comes off the net of the project, basically, right? So it's all pretty clear, it's all pretty open. But I guess in our context, it's very much like someone comes up to me after 6 months of employment and says, hey, you know, I've been killing it. I think I deserve a raise.
6 months.
After 6 months.
Is that real?
I had this on a regular basis for a while. Like, wow. And it was basically so this gets down to internal comms. Just really clean, because I totally messed it up. Didn't realize at the time. So as a starting point, people come to me like that, and I'd be like, okay, you know, let's put a pin in that. I think it's a popular phrase. Let's put a pin in that and come back to it later. Like, you know,
something you just come back to.
We'll just come back to it, right? Or, you know what, I'll get back to you. Like, or let's talk next week. Or, and so I would actually start the conversation like just defensive, passive, like, shit, like what? like kind of like I got hit, and the only thing I could do is like kind of do this.
Yeah.
And then what I find is like my next response, because I didn't have process, right? Like I learned a lot about, when the team failed, process, and how you do this.
It picks it up, yeah.
Thank you, Sid, doing this work for me, with me. I'm working with you, whatever.
Next.
You can see I need her more than she needs me, for sure. What I realized is like the next phase would be, shit, if this person leaves, I'm fucked. This has been like my first thought. Now, that would actually set up this thing where I would postpone a difficult conversation, or I'd acquiesce quicker.
Oh yeah,
right. I'd be like, because I view everyone on the team as like really valuable.
Sure.
And I'm not saying I don't now, but it was this irrational fear of like, if someone leaves, we will die, and keep the boat stable. Right. And then actually, what would happen was, and I wasn't honestly, one, I wasn't thinking about it, and two, I'm not sure I gave enough thought to it. Like I just was, if I acquiesced, and I often did, the rest of the team would be like, they would do two things. One, they'd be like, ooh, we can do that too. So actually, it created a culture.
They knew that? How do they know internally?
Because they all talk to each other. They all talk to each other. And this is something I wasn't fully appreciating until like the third, fourth, fifth person come in and would say, hey, I want a 6 month. Right. And where it started was, for some people that came in, they would come in on a low salary. I'm like, look, if after 6 months you've really done well, I'll do that. And I would put that in their contract specifically. Okay. But then that person would talk to the person that didn't have in the contract. So it's all how you communicate. And actually, what I found was, and I was going back to your back to your situation, was like, that's because we didn't have a standard that was clear and transparent. Right. If I had said no and been transparent, then it would have stopped. Now, that's not to say the people who really killed it after 6 months couldn't or shouldn't have come to me and asked for a bump. That's separate. But what was happening was, one, I would kind of, and so the team would be like, they'd go a little bit further with it. But then second, the thing that was most important to the team was that they would realize, like, this is unfair to me. Yeah. Like, why is that person who's doing that work, and they're doing a good job, why are they getting a salary bump? It doesn't make any sense to me. Right. And then it would whack up all my titles, right? Like, this person be senior, that person wasn't, and the person that, it was just, there just was no transparency. And what that led to was a real breakdown. Was it no transparency and also a lack of internal logic for it, or a standard rather? Yeah, because it was very much based on like subjective kind of like. It was based on me. Right. I mean, obviously, how am I feeling? What's the timing? Right. How do they the couch person it? Themselves? Yeah. And also, like, how did I really view it? Like, I did not view HR in the same way I do today. And another example would be, kind of the same lines. At the same time, I had someone came in. She had 8 years of full-time work experience in our field. Wow. Made her a senior. Yeah. Someone else had 3 to 4 years before she came in. I think 1 year was in a totally different industry, and she was just a normal consultant. Okay. And this created some friction. Yeah. Because the person at the lower end, who was doing a phenomenal job, I mean, she was one of our highest performers. Right. It's like, I believe I am at the same level. Right. And I didn't have I ignored it for a while. Yeah. And I don't remember how long, but I ignored it enough that, I mean, it created real friction between me and her. That's so interesting. And then between her and then the team started to feel it. Yeah. And then she ended up leaving. And I remember one of the things that she said on the exit was like, this was the one thing that, like, at the end of it, like, she gave me a list of things that I had, thank God. Not done, failed on, whatever. Yeah. And she's like, this is the one thing. It's like, I just felt like I wasn't being respected in the office for my contribution. Was she the junior or the senior? She was a junior person. She was the... Yeah. Now, honestly, I still wouldn't have given her the senior title. Right. I was actually looking at the time, like, I understand what you're saying, and you're doing really well on this. And based on this, my plan was to give her a different path. Right. That was separate from the senior, like separate from that. Sure. But that would have put her at equal level. Right. But I needed the time because I was actually restructuring the whole organization. You can't just do it overnight. So this is the only thing about internal comms. It's like the speed of response. Yeah. Right. Like. Yeah. If you put these conversations off, they can cost you. Right. For sure. So yeah, it's like one of the things. Like the lack of communication is kind of internal comms too, right? It changes. Like, how much is it okay not to talk about, right? And what do we ignore and what do we address? I think that's all part of the culture of it, right?
this kind of
so
back and forth.
Just kind of like giving the audience a little bit of flavor, like from the Chinese culture perspective, do you think that they want more transparency and conversation, or are they less likely to really care about the internal mechanics?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
From my opinion, right? I don't think they care about transparency in a general sense. What they care about is, are they maximizing their pay?
Okay.
I think that's what they, on an individual level.
Okay.
Because it's different. Yeah, I think on an individual small team, it's just there's smaller factions and things like that. But I don't think it's about the transparency. They don't care that much.
And then from a millennial standpoint, do you think the millennials?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I think millennials do care more about transparency because they're just more used to it. I mean, everything is like online and visible and in general sense, right?
Right.
So, and then with they're more used to digital structures where there's a kind of like logic to things happening, right? So I think they would appreciate that a little bit more on the regarding to transparency. Culturally, I think that's a different thing because at the same time, everybody talks about salary.
Right.
It's the third question.
Everyone
right?
talks about salary. Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, I think I don't have a good feel for it, but what I realize is that Chinese millennials, in particular, the thing that I think is that I've seen that's different than, say, Western millennials is that because in China the parents they've worked their faces off to get out of poverty.
Yep.
They've accumulated a measure of wealth.
Yep.
They've never felt so secure. This actually creates this culture where if you don't get it right, they're out. And my wife and I were talking about this, where a millennial, like we would have never quit a job without another job if we didn't have a sizable bank behind us, right? Like that's a luxury.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're seeing is that young Chinese, even like in their early to mid 20s, they're like, you know what? I've worked for 2 years. Really like the company, but
right.
I want to go travel. It's like Winston.
Yeah.
I want to go travel for 3 months or 6 months, and then I'll look for something. It's like, it's totally foreign.
Right.
And I think like this you'll largely see this if you've failed somewhere in the internal communications, either from how we're speaking to them, but then also the second part of where maybe we should head this conversation is like, how do we talk to these people? Because if we're not talking to them regularly, we don't see this coming.
Right.
And then they're just like, you know what? They don't care about me enough to like, so I'm going to do my next thing. I don't know what it is, but they're more comfortable actually not gritting through to get to the next thing. They're like, you know what? I've learned as much as I can learn. I've accomplished what I think I need to. And I'm out. And I think like that adds another layer of like why you need to be much more, transparent and engaging, I guess, in the office.
That's interesting. In talking about transparency, what I do with the team is that I actually talk to them about their options outside the company because I'm trying to gauge how much they want to continue down this path too.
Right.
And I also want to be neutral in that regard as a friend, and it sounds, on a small team, you can do that, right? Where I say like, all right, well, outside the company, what paths might you be looking at? Do you ever think about going to this kind of company or that kind of company? Or what, like, how are we going to move forward here? Because even if they want to go outside, and that's fine, maybe I can help them along that path. Because in the long run, they'll be cool. Then I can know what's happening in their world, and then we can deal with it together, right? But if I don't present them that option, then they think I'm only thinking about Let's Make Great, and you have to work with Let's Make Great and all that kind of stuff, right? And they don't give a shit, They just they want to find the best opportunity for them, for their personal growth, their career development, their financial development, all that kind of stuff. Right. So I want to work with them to present those options, and I'm very honest in the other sense. We're not maximizing our financial impact at Let's Make Great. That's something that we need to get better at. Can you while we're doing that, can you work with us, right? Right. So it's a give and take there.
Okay. That's actually really productive or proactive.
It's very, very proactive, man. And we do it like once a quarter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's like there's so many personal conversations on the team, right? It's really overdone. But because I hear so much about millennial stuff, right? I'm like, all right, let me get ahead of it.
Okay. So can you overdo it?
Yes. Okay. Absolutely. So I have this other voice in me where I go like, no, don't send that message to them. It's gonna, and there's a lot of times where like, hey, are you okay? You know, where I'm a little bit too caring.
Right.
And I wonder how many times I can do that. So I don't do it every single time. If it's over like a text message or anything like that. But if it's in person, I will do it. I will check in with them. Like if I see emotion, like the look on their face or whatever, that's my trigger. I gotta like, hey, what's going on? I see you're stuck. I see something's going on in the back of your mind. You're not tuned into the team meeting or our meeting or whatever. Like, let's talk about that. And so there was, but on WeChat on our messaging platform, I'll pull back a lot more than I check in on them.
Okay.
So that's a little bit more fair or balanced, I think.
You know, I used to do that.
What?
With the team that crashed, I was a lot more like, hey, are you okay? Like I would read the emotions.
Right.
And I think I turned the dial up a little bit too much.
Oh yeah.
And it became like, no, I'm fine. Right? Like that would be the response I get. Now what I'm trying to do is just a lot more like, hey, how are things going? And like a lot more, not just when I see something.
Right.
Maybe when I don't, like, hey, how's it going? And like a little bit more jovial. I also think when HR process kicks in, this is a great, like where Sid sits and how she works with a team, she can really work through like the tactical friction points or, you know, understanding their personal development. Like what do they want? Like, I can't have that conversation with someone. I mean, I know obviously that people want to, over time, leave what we're doing to grow into another space. That's cool.
Reasonable. Yeah.
I can't have an unbiased conversation about that usually. Like a lot of times I can talk to people on their way out and I'll be like, okay, what are your options? And I did this with someone who left. She's like, I have these two up. Like, do not take that one. Take this one because this is where this one is headed. And you don't want to be there. The value long-term is here. You know.
Interesting. And you said that to her.
I said that to her just directly, and she took the other job. Like she took the one I told her to.
Yeah.
So even though I'm not sure how much actually relationship we had on our way out, I was able to give her a piece of information. She's like, okay, that's valuable for me. But now realizing it's just a little check-ins. I don't have a cycle for it, but Sydney has it broken down. Like obviously the annual review, I'd say she's probably built in a 6-month review, like a quarterly coffee, and then like a monthly kind of, you know, like, and it's not all, you know, these are the 10 questions and rank 1 to 10, but on some of them, she's not like, yet. You know what, I can see this person's a little bit edgy, or I can see they've done really well. Now they want to know what the next step is or the next project. It's also great to have her in the sense of like, when we have a few to, like, we don't have enough projects for everyone, or we need to do something, we need someone to change tact. She's really good at understanding like how to help people see like, you know, how, like, what's going on without it being like my emotions baked in, because what I realize, like, if things are going if they aren't going so well, I can push those emotions out. So having someone in between you really helps, because they can just say like, okay, look, this is where you are, this is where we need to be, what do you want to work on as part of this, and then get agreement, get alignment, and then keep moving. And I think like that's the key to it, is like, you know, whether it's a scheduling thing or it's just a general framework of how do you talk to people.
I think it's both, right? I mean, you know, as much as I have the quarterly thing, I'm saying it happens quarterly. It's not that I have it quarterly scheduled, right? And so it's just, you seeing people throughout the year and how they're progressing, and you see like, all right, how are you doing with that? Are you still working on it? And if a few times they're not progressing in the way that they want to progress, then we have to have a different conversation. Right?
Now, so tactically, what are the best ways that you've found to talk to people? Like, you have a range of tools, you know, sitting face to face, you have WeChat, email, like what's the best ways, and what are maybe some of the, not the worst ways, but what are the ways that create the most confusion?
I think the hardest is when I'm not in town, and you know, they don't want to bother me, and I have no idea what's going on their side, and that's where it gets a little difficult to create conversations. And sometimes we'll have like a once a week check-in during that time and have a phone call or whatever. And the best is obviously face to face, and we try to do that individually, one-on-one. I'm saying we try to do that once a month, maybe.
Is that over coffee? Is that in a meeting room?
Yeah, it's a coffee. You know, because actually we have our team meetings, and then after that, everyone's free. So we're only together once a week, maybe twice a week, where we're working together. on a second day.
Yeah.
And then every time in between, we might have some, or either before and after the meeting, we might have some like free time to have coffee. And and so there's a lot of opportunities for those coffee check-ins and things like that.
So you've worked on teams, not just with Let's Make Great, but I know that like where you are all physically present all the time, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. What's the differences, or what's the like between running a totally decentralized team and running, because you guys are running the team of the future. This is what everyone talks about.
Right.
We're all going to work from home. We're going to come into a co-shared space for a couple meetings, and then we're going to bounce back out and do our work. Like, what's the challenges, or what's the opportunity, or like what are some takeaways from that?
I think when I was working in an office back in the day, there's a certain increased level of trust. I see you every day, and you're always there. You're always reliable, and there's this constant feedback loop. So the performance adjustments is easier to make. I can always give feedback, or we can always look over each other's shoulder, and there's a stronger camaraderie because we physically are working on the same things together, right? But when you're doing it digitally over Google Docs or whatever, it feels impersonal. It feels impersonal. It feels even like you're being overly critical sometimes, right? Because you can point out like this, and this. In person, and it's like, oh yeah, that's cool, thanks for giving me that feedback. But if you like highlight it you draw so much attention to it, it feels like you're giving like negative feedback and like marking somebody's paper, and that's you lose that. That's one thing. But then more importantly, by working decentralized and digitally, you don't have the pulse of what's happening. The rhythm of the relationship is all messed up because it's only when somebody checks in with each other. So you don't just look over and see, Betty in the office over there is like, has her head down or is on the phone or whatever, right? There's no instant connection, right? It is only when I reach out and they decide to respond, or when they reach out and when I decide to respond. Right. And of course we have our fixed check-in points every week, right? We have our check-in points, but it's not enough. Right. And so that's something that I really regret in many cases.
I kind of think like, I find it easier sometimes to manage people online because you can separate yourself emotionally and just be like, this is what I need in bullet points. Right. And it's fair in a way, right? But I really struggle with the fact that like if you're not together, how do you, how does the team gossip and talk about their family and talk about what their favorite food is? Like that stuff is so important. And I think, if they're not doing that, how do you you mentioned trust right off. I'm like, that's really a fundamental part of the trust. It's like, you know what, we go through this together. And I've seen like my team, like where a couple people work really closely together. They'll be tight. They'll eat lunch together all the time. And then a few months later, we'll reshuffle the projects, and then you'll see, and like, but if you're not together, it really does change the atmosphere. It makes it a little bit more anonymous. It makes it a little bit easier to disconnect. It also, I would argue, does it make you more productive when you're on a project or less productive? Like I really balance that. Like if I care less about this team, will I give as much? But if I want to shine, I can give more. Like it's easier to shine, but it's also easier to fade away.
Yeah, so I think performance-wise, we suffer in many cases because we're not together all the time, right? But at the same time, when there are projects, we are together, right? A lot, like 3, 4, 5 times a week. Okay. On the weekends too. So that's where giving them the freedom comes back to pay as they're taking responsibility on occasion. Not every time, but enough so that I feel it's good. And also, it pushes the responsibility of personal development back on them, and they realize that they have to they have to manage their own time. Right. And so this is a slightly different topic, of course, but we, by having this framework, we're able to push back and forth. We have team time, you have individual time, and you can do whatever, personal projects, whatever, but like it's a back and forth here.
As we wrap up, I'm curious about one thing. It's how much, I mean, we will talk to our teams if we see like a facial expression or we feel some friction. How much do they come back and ask you, like, hey, Brian, how are you doing, man?
Oh, they never. They almost never ask.
Almost never ask.
Yeah,
right.
they almost never ask, and that's something I have to work towards. Because I express myself so much. Yeah. I'm just always telling them and giving them all right. They don't even care sometimes that I'm going to tell them, oh, shitty day, I'm in a bad mood, whatever. They don't want to hear all that.
Right.
So I over communicate, right, in that regard.
As a starting point.
And then they, again, because I over communicate, they might not care as much and whatever. So they don't check in. And in another way, I've also had to learn to not care that they don't check in.
Okay.
Because it seems like they don't care, right? Yep. But
it's very strong of you, Brian.
No, the thing is, you're the boss.
Yeah.
You're the man, right?
Okay.
And so,
But you've got needs too, Brian. Yeah. Right? Like, and you're having a shitty day, and they react to that. Like, you walk into a meeting.
Yeah.
And your face is bright red because you're like, fuck, we got like $3 in the account, right?
Yeah.
How do you talk to them about that? And outside of maybe griping about your day, how do you tell them this is really something that I've got going on and I need you guys to understand this? Do you do that? Do you
do
stay
that.
I'm the boss?
The over communication is so key because it's a slow drip the entire time. Yeah. So it never surprises them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I give them lots of warning signs the entire way through.
Okay.
And then we have this technique. Actually, that's what I was thinking about for this topic. We took some courses before, and it was NVC. You've heard of that before?
No.
It's Nonviolent Communication, right? It's a really great way of communicating. There's a framework for it, right? And so it's I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's something around listing out the facts, right? Listing out your interpretation of that, and then saying what your unmet need was, and then what your request is, right? Okay. So it goes through this framework, and it allows the individuals to express themselves in both from their perspective and ask them to reflect on their own emotional need.
Right.
So that's being unfulfilled, and then also ask the other person for something. So it creates that interaction.
Right.
So NVC, we've only had to use it formally a few times, but informally through the team, because we try to cover each one of these bases just through conversation.
Right.
It creates more of a understanding with each other. And so in this second half of 2019, when we needed to deploy that a little more, it changed the dynamic for everybody, because then they could see how other people were thinking. Whereas before, they weren't communicating their unmet needs. They weren't communicating their feelings even. They were just raging or whatever, right? And so that part, once we had to do intervention, I sat down, it's all right, let's use the framework. Remember that framework? If you don't remember, here it is again, right? Facts, interpretation, needs, and then your request. And then you go back and forth, right? So once we set that framework, I had to facilitate the conversation between all the different people in the team. So then it's all right, then this person can fully express all 4 of those key points.
Right.
The next person can fully respond with all 4 key points. And then we're starting to lay out our thoughts and feelings on the table so everybody can see them.
Yeah.
And that changed everything.
That's awesome.
Everything. It was a little bit like playing a marriage counselor.
Yeah.
It felt like that.
That's awesome.
And I listened to some marriage counseling podcasts. I don't know. I like this stuff, right? Relationships, people. And so,
that's what it's about, right?
That's what it's about, people. And so that really helped us. And the dynamic of the team changed.
Yeah.
In a way that it's starting to become healthy. So
great.
Starting, it's always, I think, a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
You just got to keep at it. So
keep at it.
NVC, Nonviolent Communication.
Right.
There's a huge literature and there's a lot of background, so you can go check that out. I think I also heard about it recently at Y Combinator. They also talked about using it as a framework. So I was like, that's cool.
So I definitely think it's one of these topics that has gotten a lot of steam lately. Yeah. I think maybe that's because the intergenerations. Now you have baby boomers, Gen Xers, Millennials, and Zs all working together with each other.
Right.
And the irony is that the best way to teach a millennial how to talk with their boss is to teach them how to manage the next generation below them, right? They start to realize how difficult it is to communicate. And that's why these structures and they're becoming so they're becoming so important.
Yeah.
And that's why I think
prevalent.
Through this conversation, it's really first off, I did not appreciate how important it was until I literally lost the team. That's what it cost me. And
it's weird how that is.
Anyone who's on the team, if they're actually listening to this, they'll tell you I missed probably 20, 30, 40 cues. But even when I had the conversations, I wouldn't be an active listener. And when I would make a commitment, a lot of times, as someone who doesn't really talk a lot much externally about some of these things, if you're not saying like, hey, I got this done, well then they don't think that you're holding up your end of the bargain either.
Right.
So when you're communicating, they start to like close up and go, well, what's the point?
Right.
Like, why should I tell you what's going on?
Yeah.
But I think like a framework like that, nonviolent communication, I've heard this from a few people. There's a guy in Singapore that does this as well, and he actually did one of Obama's big things recently in Singapore because it's so powerful. It's like we really do not know how to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And all the mediums and frameworks and expectations, they're all changing now because of the digitization, right? But also because of the intergenerational.
Yep.
And that's why we really need to
cross-cultural,
spend,
throw that in there.
God,
I mean, for us, that's a thing here in Shanghai,
huge,
right? In Asia. So
yeah, like they've got to learn how to talk to me. Like that's a big one. It's all their fault. But they've got like all these things come into play, and if you can't work it out, you're definitely not going to succeed. Like you're not going to scale.
Right.
You're not going to have multiple. Like I don't even know how to think about say 3, 4, 5 offices. Like I've had 3 offices before, but we're all on the same mission.
Yeah.
But as I look at I will have 2 to 3 offices hopefully later this year, next year, and it's like
cool. Good luck.
One of the big things that we need to focus on besides funding and executing on the work is going to be how do we communicate?
Right.
I wouldn't even call it build culture. We'll leave that for a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Just internally communicate on the important matters of the organization, from salary requests to performance reviews to keeping people accountable on projects.
Conversations, right? Just like regular.
Yeah, to Brian and Rich are stressed out. Whatever it may be, or we're actually, we're having the highs of our life, but we don't want to like brag about it and like look. It's so, I think this is just
some
such
sensitivity
an important topic,
there.
Right?
Yeah.
Just understanding that balance, but then having the frameworks.
Yeah, I think I said that back and forth, give and take, so many times this episode, and it makes sense. We were talking about internal comms, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect, but there needs to be the feedback loop, that conversation, right?
Right.
Because that's the thing. That's why I'm such an over communicator inside the team. That if you don't have that, what are you working on? What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
What's that gonna be like, right? And I think especially like you bring up in today's world, it's changing so much that we don't have the in-person stuff.
Yeah.
The digital stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I'd like to wrap this up with a question to the community.
Yeah.
Not to the entrepreneurs and the bosses.
Sure.
But to the teams and to the staff. Like, all right, look, you've got 2 bosses, 2 entrepreneurs up here. We have kind of put out what we think our challenges, our opportunities, why it's important. Can you send us like an example of like when you want to talk to your boss but you didn't, and then what the outcome was? Like, oftentimes it's a loser's outcome. You left the organization. You did something that you wouldn't have otherwise because you weren't getting the communication that you needed. Right. If you can send something like that, we'll work out some kind of like, we'll mention you if you want it. We'll do what you need. But I'm really curious because I think a lot of times we fail to really understand the other side in the right way and at the right time, and then maintain a commitment to it.
So basically, what's the employee's perspective?
Yeah, what's the employee's perspective?
What was a difficult time for you in communicating back up to your boss?
Right. And then if you're an entrepreneur who's gone through a challenge, or you have a tip, trick, tool, tactic, hack, please link it down below, or comment down below. I'd be really curious to see how others have done this. I know you got Rockefeller, you've got this nonviolent communication. But what are things that you've put into place that you think brought your organization to the next level? I'd be very curious about that as well.
Keep the conversation going.
All right.
See you next
Thank you very much.
time.
Have a great week.
Bye, guys.